Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Grieving Voices. Today, my guest is Moussa Mikhail. He is a submarine Navy veteran, podcast host, entrepreneur, speaker, coach, and author based out of Las Vegas, Nevada. He spent cumulatively over 2 years of his naval service underwater and used that time to develop himself and plan his entrepreneurial ventures. He operates a real estate business and his media coaching company. He's host of the Conqueror Approach podcast about a journey of self mastery, mind, body, spirit, and finances. It has been streamed in 30 countries to date. He has dedicated his life to spreading the principles of mastery and empowering others to live their most authentic and highest potential. I love that last line. I'm all about that too. So, what brings you to Grieving Voices? And thank you for being here too, by the way.
Thank you. It's my privilege to be here. I love the work that you're doing. And I feel like the conversations that happen on these topics need to happen more often than not now. And in my military service, you mentioned a little bit, I was on a submarine, so it was definitely mentally challenging, right? Because it's a different lifestyle. Most people aren't used to being in a tube for weeks, months on end. So it was a big adjustment. At first, I was actually really afraid to do it. To be honest, I didn't want to be in a tube. I love being outside. I love nature, and the thought of being isolated in confinement for extended periods of times didn't really get me excited. And I used that to really challenge myself out in my comfort zone because it was extremely out of my comfort zone. If there's one thing the Navy offered that was outside my comfort zone the most, it was probably the submarines. And that's what I ended up with. So I somehow attracted that into my life. And I figured I would do my best and use it to challenge myself mentally and get past it. And I did. I had a very successful tour as a submariner, and I still didn't feel fulfilled. That's why I got out to do my entrepreneurial things. Now, a lot of it's to give back to those who are serving and others who are just struggling with their mindset to get through that those challenges, whether it's on a submarine or anywhere else, because the military has a lot of issues with mental health, and people are not talking about it enough. And a lot of it is in a way stigmatized. Like it's a negative for you to go seek mental help sometimes, and it shouldn't be that way. So a lot of my mission now is to help people on their journeys get a little bit better, mindset wise, health and fitness wise, spiritually, and even finances. So that's really what is driving me now.
It's a whole body approach. Because there's not just one part of us that suffers typically, especially with grief. It's the whole of us and how we show up in the world and our relationships and how we have a relationship to our money and everything, right? Spirituality, faith, all of it. So I absolutely love that. And just to your point about the military and the mental health, which has been, there's been a lot of push and a lot of forward momentum in that department. But just even 2 years ago, I was at a mental health summit, and I had a booth there with my grief work. And I listened to a bunch of speakers and talkers and stuff. And there was a veteran who shared his story of attempted suicide, which was really, truly moving. But what I didn't hear in all of the talks about suicide was the word grief. It wasn't mentioned once. And so I think too, my push is to get people talking about grief, because that's the root, really, I believe, that leads people down that path often. So can you share your personal story of how this work has evolved for you?
Yeah, and I love that because grief is a crucial element, if not the most important, because it's when we're not effectively processing traumas or grieving, whether it's something that we've developed as children, any traumatic experiences that led up to us being unable to process our emotions in a healthy way. Those things over time compound to really affect the brain in a lot of ways. And then you see things like suicide or just mental health issues, mental illness. Those things don't just happen overnight, right? You wouldn't want to just wake up one day and then like, oh, today's the day that I'm going to lose my mind, right? It's a process. It's a sequence of events. It's a timeline of developing issues compounded over each other that lead to these really bad things or just issues. And in, as a society, I really love the book that just recently came out, I think, called What Happened to You by Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah. And it's kind of to change the narrative of what's wrong with you to what happened to you. And a lot of it is the failure to get support and process things like grief, trauma, right? It's those things that undealt with, ignored, lead to very, very serious issues. And then we as a society, we look at those people, it's like, what the hell's wrong with this guy or this woman? Like, why would they do that? Or why are they crazy or whatever the case is, whatever labels we put on them, instead of looking deeper, like what happened? What's causing that? So in my military service, at the end of 2019, on my submarine in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, there was a guy that I served with, I knew, and I noticed there was a lot of things off, but I wasn't as knowledgeable on these type of things, and I really started taking it more seriously after this event. And I noticed there was things off, and I never thought it would get to a very, very serious point like it did. But at the end of 2019, right before Christmas, there was a lot of things that led up to it, I'm sure. But then this particular sailor on watch, armed with an M4 rifle and a pistol, decided to shoot two Hawaiian shipyard workers that he didn't know. He killed them, and then he took his own life there. So it was active shooter. My submarine, I wasn't there at the time because I was dealing with processing out of the Navy. However, I have a lot of good friends that were there, and then people calling me all over, right? I had no idea what was going on. People calling me from the base because they hear the announcement, active shooter on USS Columbia shipyard, whatever, and then they don't know what's going on, and I didn't know what's going on, so I feared the worst. I didn't know who was getting hurt, and then at the end of it, it was two innocent civilian Hawaiian men who were great engineers, who had families, had no idea that was coming, had nothing to do with that sailor, didn't know him, never even probably talked to him for a minute of their lives. And they lost their lives because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. The thing that bothered me the most was, this is a common thing in the military, is they don't really make these things public as much, right? Obviously, that was a public event because that was a very serious event, made headlines. But what was the response of the Navy from that? You know, and this is not to bash the military. They want to protect their image so they can continue to recruit people and not think that people are committing suicide all the time in the military. Like, no one would want to join if they're like, why the hell people are killing themselves because they're in the military? So they do the best they can to make it hidden. And I saw that firsthand because I was on the submarine when high level men came down and said, this is an isolated incident. You guys had nothing to do with it, and they didn't take any ownership for it, which is the opposite of what people needed. Right? These things don't just happen. There's a lot of things that we could have took, a lot of things we could have done to potentially prevent it, and not to beat ourselves up, something like that as a tragedy, but what could we have done? How can we take this more seriously? How can we actually help people, right? And for me, I have a strong feeling that he went through some serious trauma before he joined the military, because he was a young guy. He was 22, right? So he came in, and since day one, he had a lot of emotional walls. His communication was off. Some things didn't make sense. It was disorganized in speech. So I know psychologists can notice a lot of those things are actually signs of serious trauma which can lead up to things when put under an extreme situation for a long period. And he was on the submarine for about a year and a half, and it was a challenging experience for him. It was hard for him to grasp what we were doing there. So that's another thing. When people aren't learning, it's not that they're stupid or dumb, right? Which what people would default saying, "Oh, you're stupid. Like, why can't you learn this?" There is actually parts of the brain when you're dealing with a lot of serious trauma, it prevents you from using the other parts of the brain that help you learn faster or understand. Comprehension is different when you have a lot of hard issues that have not been dealt with. So he definitely needed some help before, right? Preventative things, right? And that's kind of what I'm working to do with the podcast. I get experts and specialists in these types of conversations, health and nutrition, because obviously the body has a big role. The mind and the body is connected. If the mind's not in a good state, the rest of the body won't be a good state. And a lot of those pains and aches and diseases that we have in our bodies are indications of our mental health not being there. So these are all signs. And then that's kind of what I love talking about, is helping people understand the signs so they can continue to work on themselves. So these types of things can happen less and happen never, ideally, right? And there was other instances of suicide that I heard about even when I was active duty, and I never even like they didn't even give us the names of the guys. It was just kind of like, let's keep this in the dark. Let's not even talk about it. I know those didn't make the news headlines, but it was happening. And those are the why. Like, why is this happening? So this is why I love these types of podcasts and have these conversations, because like you said, those families still grieve, I'm sure, to this day, right? This is right before Christmas. Like, those families are missing their fathers or uncles, whatever the case is. And I believe it was preventable.
You said a lot in there, and I have a few thoughts that I'd like to just circle back to. Coming back to what you said about what happened to you in that book, that's what I've actually said that in a podcast. I don't know who I was interviewing, but imagine if someone who's feeling depressed or having depressive thoughts goes into a doctor's office. How often do they say, "What happened to you?" Never. And I mean, that's the first line. People don't go to the doctor when they're feeling awesome. They go to the doctor when they're feeling badly. And oftentimes that could be the first line of defense, is someone saying, "What happened to you?" And the most important question, to open up a bigger conversation about really what's going on and what is possibly needed in further treatment rather than just a pill. So that's one thought. Um, I'm a veteran as well, and just being at that mental health summit, and on my rotation to Iraq, we had lost 3 guys. And I know that there was no communication about grief. There is no, like, even out processing, right? And here's the thing too, I think a lot of soldiers will resonate with and understand, and you probably too. You will lie so that you can advance your career, and you will lie to not feel less than. And if you're struggling with your mental health, I think it's especially hard for people in the military to admit to that. And so, like you said, to your point, it trickles from the top down. And I think if the leadership lead by example in this department, that's what will ultimately change the conversation around grief, suicide prevention, suicide communication. It's educating soldiers to understand what the signs are, to understand that you're not a snitch, that you could be potentially saving that person's life or the lives of others, right? It's a big conversation, I think. And maybe it's happening more than we think. I hope so. Actually, later this week, I'm having a conversation with Scott Mann, He runs the Rooftop Leadership. He was a Green Beret in Afghanistan. I'm very interested in having this particular conversation with him as well about leadership and the top down and grief in particular. And you bring up another good point. It's, the gentleman that did that and how he probably had trauma and things that were unprocessed. I actually, at that mental health summit, I even asked the therapist, I said, why doesn't the military implement some sort of ACE study questionnaire? I don't know if you're familiar with the ACE study, adverse
Mhm.
childhood experiences. But if they actually made that like a screening tool for servicemen and women, because someone who deploys, who then further experiences more trauma and grieving experiences, and they had a really traumatic childhood, they're exponentially at greater risk for suicide, anxiety, depression, all of those things. So yeah, you spoke to the signs. So can you share a little bit more about that and what you've learned about all of that?
Yeah, I've learned that I can sit there and be upset that the military didn't do enough or didn't do whatever, but that's not going to really solve the issues at this moment, right? It's not going to allow me to do the most I can do right now. And you said it really well. It really is. I think that's a great idea. Getting some type of questionnaire to at least screen people in this way. There should be some mandatory mental health checks, work to actually process that stuff, because people bottle it in for so long and it has to go somewhere at some point. And if people don't understand how to deal with it, it gets bad. I've noticed a lot of things from that when I reviewed his behavior. It's usually these weird or off behaviors indicate like trauma, something, the inability to communicate clearly, or just like stonewalling, or like just anger, shaking, those types of things. We should be inquiring more, like, hey, was like, what happened? Like, we should have deeper conversations, because then people can start to realize, because when people make or have any traumatic experience when they're younger, they might not consciously make the link between that experience and their behavior, or why, they might have not been able to make that link beside from a trauma to someone's inability to learn, or to catch along, or grasp concepts, right? It's there's links between all of that, though. And I think the day of, one of my leaders, who were actually, he was in a disciplinary review that day, and at a certain point he stopped responding and he started shaking, which I don't know all the reasons why that can happen to someone, but I know there's a lot going on there, a lot of emotion that person doesn't know how to deal with or process, so it just shuts them down. And if their body is involuntarily doing things, there's emotion there. There's a lot of emotion there. There's anger, there's sadness, there's a lot of things, right? So because the body responds in a certain way, that can tell us there's a lot of stuff here that hasn't been dealt with. There's a lot of energy that hasn't been processed. Emotion is energy in motion. A lot of energy that hasn't been moved effectively. It's still there. And that's why people can need that. It's always a good idea to get some type of mental health, because even me, I'll say I'm pretty intelligent in this conversation, and these types of things. I can only see myself from my perspective. There's things that I won't be able to see until somebody else can give me that feedback, right? And give me the feedback of how I'm reacting and responding to things. So it's important for us to implement some type of way to create a support system where people feel safe enough to talk about these things, whatever traumas they're facing, right? And since then, I've been doing a lot of work on me, because leadership begins with self, right? And that's kind of the whole idea of my show. The quote that got me to name the show was a Plato quote called "The first and best victory is to conquer self." So leadership is a leadership of self first. So the problem we have isn't just like, oh, this guy came into the Navy with issues and then it became bigger and bigger until someone died or he killed himself. A lot of the leaders don't know how to process their emotions either. A lot of leaders don't know because they never got that kind of support. And I know it might be different for you, but and my submarine is all men that feel it's weak to be vulnerable, that it's not tough to complain, or not. I won't say complain, because complaining is a lot of victimization to self too, but just to talk about what's really bothering you. As a man, it's weak to talk about your feelings a lot of times. Society says, movies, Hollywood says. So when you have a group full of men and none of them share, none of them open up, none of them talk about how they feel, none of them feel like they can go talk to a mental health professional without getting some type of criticism from their crew or whatever the case is, you have a group of dysfunctional men trying to function and learning to function within their dysfunction, which is not the most productive, it's not the most effective, it's not the most healthy. And then we start getting signs in our body, we start getting diseases. And my theory on this, the diseases that we feel around our body, even though it might not sound like it had anything to do. I have a thyroid issue when I was in the Navy. Some people might just say, oh, that's just a thyroid disease. That has something to do with mental health. My inability to keep myself stress free or manage my stress created disease, manifests these disease, because the immune system doesn't work under stress very well. So these are the type of conversations that I feel is necessary. And part of it is now, how can I get these conversations, these type of podcasts to more military people? Because even on my podcast, I'm not saying this is for broken people who have mental health issues, because anyone can take their journey on. But it could take just a simple person or just one person to say, hey man, it's okay. Like, let's do this. Let's talk about this. Like, what's going on here? Like, these criticisms are not as important as your well-being and your wellness. So I get very passionate about this stuff, and it's really what I'm dedicating everything to now is, how can I support people who really don't know how to support yourselves? Because at a certain point, a lot of these traumas become subconscious, and then the behaviors are subconscious. So people don't know why they do things they do. And that's why we need feedback, we need support, we need more help, more eyes around us to see why we do the things we do. Because a lot of it is we just don't know what we don't know. We don't know how those traumas bleed into our behavior, our learning, our health, our performance. And that's usually what it is. Someone who doesn't perform in any business, any career field, if they're not performing well, there's an issue there with mentality, mental health. There's something that is occupying most of their mind, so they cannot perform the way they can or are capable of. So I know I got it on tangent. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, it's,
But
I mean, you speak my language, because as a Reiki master, I'm all about the energy and how energy gets stuck in our bodies. And speaking about the thyroid, that's the throat chakra. It's unable to speak
Mhm.
your truth. It's unable to
Yeah,
communicate how you feel and communicate, um, you know, just communicate. If
exactly.
it's
I got
blocked or
cancer there
closed.
because
Yeah.
of that.
Wow. I mean,
Yeah,
yes,
well, I was
I
in. So I understand. I didn't know at the time, and I refused to say, "Oh, I got that." Oh, it's just like it just happened. Like it happens. It's a common thing, right? Nowadays, it's a lot of people have it. Let me just cut it out and deal with like, oh, problem solved. No, I took the opposite. I was like, I'm not cutting it out. This is a sign that I need to learn how to process this, or else I could cut it out, but it's going to show up somewhere else, right? Disease shows up if the trauma and the pain and the suffering and the stress are still there in your body. It'll come out in different ways. Like
absolutely.
I have a good chiropractor, and we talk about like my neck pain. He never talks about like, oh, it's a spine or it's a muscle or it's like, no, he's like, this is holding on to anger. This is why your neck hurts. And I was like, oh, well, this is helpful because this is a way to approach it instead of, oh, let me go crack your neck real quick and like I'll see you next week. It's like, no, we got to get the energy processed so it can actually relieve the tension there long term, right? So chiropractors, some of them know a lot of this the energy because the spinal cord, the nervous system, when it's under stress and under tension, you start getting posture issues, back pain, neck pain, and that was me too. I'm still working on that. I'll see my chiropractor in 2 days.
Well, and the acupuncture is a lot like Reiki
Hmm.
in that it helps to open the flow of the energy, right? You might want to look into Reiki.
Yeah, I did one Reiki class before. I haven't done acupuncture, but I'm definitely was actually really interested in it. I was asking people about it out here in Vegas because I definitely want to check it out. And it just like that, it's a process. It's not something you do once, right? And that's why it's all about the journey. And mental health issues, not like, oh, let me go talk to some person one time. No, it's a practice. How can I practice moving this energy? Because if it gets stored up as anger, like it was for me, it's going to come out somewhere else. It might blow the lid off when I don't want it to, right? It's going to come out uncontrollably at some point. So how do I process that in a healthy way so no one gets hurt and I don't get hurt physically with my body? I don't suffer from disease because I'm holding on to everything. So this is the conversation that I have myself a lot and that I share with other people because it is a huge part of just being happy and living a fulfilled life and just performing and creating our maximized life that we can create is dealing with ourselves first.
So let's circle back because I don't want to gloss over the cancer diagnosis. But when you first heard those words, what went through your mind?
Yeah, I was actually fit. I was still in the Navy, so I was concerned. However, I knew it wasn't. I wasn't afraid. I was. I understood this type was. It's one that doesn't really spread very fast, and it didn't really spread since I've had it. It's very slow growing, and I looked at it. I knew since I heard it that I wasn't going to just do the modern approach to removing parts and whatever. The only option I had was surgery, and it was at a size that's a little too small for most of them to have surgery. If it's less than a centimeter, they usually don't want to remove anything, and mine's was less than a centimeter, and it still is. And I was like, okay, so I'll monitor it. Everyone looked at me like I was stupid for not wanting to have surgery. All the doctors I was talking to in the military, because they just that's the language they speak, right? A butcher cuts, surgeon removes things. So they were just like, let's just remove it and it's gone. I looked at it from a more spiritual lens, right? Like if I knew I wanted to do this work when I got out the military. This is really right before, like a couple months before I got out, I found out. And it was like, I want to do this work. So me being spiritual looked at it as, well, this might be necessary for me to overcome and live through so I can live self-mastery. I can live what really mastering the mind, the body, and spirit is, and heal. And when I do that, I'll be able to speak to everyone who has disease in a different way and have them listen that we have a lot of control over these things. I've known people who've healed from a lot of diseases. We see diabetes, heart disease, a lot of those things get reversed, right? If you see work by Joe Dispenza, this man got hit by a truck and healed himself without any surgery. Like it's we say it's a miracle. However, our body, every single cell in our body is a miracle.
Yeah, he was told you'd never walk again.
Yeah. And I study, I'm learning, I'm in school for nutrition science. I'm studying a lot of biology. How our body does the things it does is it's a miracle. And that's all I could say about that. So healing is part of our body. Our body does that. You get a cut on your finger, you don't have to think about it. It's going to heal. The body knows, it'll respond, it'll clot up that cut, and you get a scab, and in a little while will be gone, and you don't even know you had it. Right? Same thing with internal damage and cuts. For me, that was just a lesion on my thyroid. I looked at it as, okay, I talked to a nutritionist. She told me the same thing about expressing myself, right? And I was like, very true. I've held in stress for the last 3 years. I was in constant stress every day. It was not, and I was succeeding through it. I was functioning. However, it didn't mean I wasn't dealing with a lot of stress. I was just holding it in though. I didn't want to talk to, or at least that's the story I told myself. I could have found an opportunity, but I didn't because I didn't want to seem weak. I was the leader of a division, navigation. I had to be the strong leader, right? And that's the type of thinking that keeps people from talking about it. And then now it's like, I'm gonna heal this, right? If I keep my mind in the right way, if I'm moving the energy from my body, so I'm not holding on to it, if I'm processing my emotions, whether it's anger, sadness, frustration, not holding on to it, so like my body can start healing. Because I believe you have to be in a peaceful state for your body to maximize healing. And that's why meditation is such a big thing for me now, and dealing with these things. So now it's like a holistic approach. It's not just cut it out, because then if I cut it out, it might show up in a different form. If I'm still doing the same thing, that the causal action of holding everything in, not communicating, not expressing, not talking about it, right? So I figured the best way to talk about it is like make a podcast. And I still haven't really talked about it that much, because I don't like to identify myself as like I am dealing with that, right? It's just it's a small thing for me, and it was enough of a sign to say I need to take care of my body, because I was very healthy and I still got it, right? I need to take care of my mindset, my mental health. My physical body is great. I'm active, I'm healthy, mostly plant-based. At the time I was fully plant-based. I was taking care of myself. It doesn't even affect my thyroid hormone or anything. So it's just there. It was a flag, a red flag for me, a sign that I need to take this serious, and this is part of my journey now. And when I overcome this, I'll help other people overcome their issue. So that's my view on it now.
I love that. Thank you for sharing all of that. But I do have a deeper question.
Yeah.
What has been your grief experience growing up?
Yeah, my grief experience growing up was my parents moved to America from Egypt. I was born here. I grew up seeing a lot of verbal abuse between them. I never really saw love in my household. Like that wasn't really a thing. When I was about 12, 13, my parents separated. They got a divorce. And that was tough to see too. So a lot of it was, there was always anger. There's always these emotions. There was never really love growing up. I received a lot of love from them individually, but seeing parents that hate each other pretty much, it made an imprint on my mind. at a very young age. They got divorced. I was still pretty young. And then my father passed away when I was in high school. So that was another thing, right? He'd passed away from lung cancer. And I had an uncle who I was very close to, pass away when I was about 10 or 11, who had a heart attack at 55. So they both died at 55. And that's what got me really interested in health. And then as I'm growing in health, I'm understanding why the mindset plays a role in a lot of these things, whether it's heart disease, lung cancer, right? Smoking cigarettes, it's an addiction. So now I'm studying addiction in a very different way. And people have that addiction because of what? Because it may calm them down from dealing with their trauma, their issues, their
Grief.
problems, their grief, right? So that is their mechanism to feel better in the moment, right? So what are healthy ways to feel better in the moment? And what's crazy thing is they did some study. I can't remember all the details, but they noticed that the thing that helps cigarette smokers the most when they smoke is that they start taking deeper breaths
Hmm.
and they get a sense of calm. And they're like, maybe it is a cigarette because it has nicotine, all those weird things. Or is it because they're breathing bigger now? They have deeper breaths. So breath work is a huge thing for me. But yeah, those are the big things that, you know, I didn't really grieve my father's death that much, because I wanted to be strong. And, I don't have any resentment for him. I've let that go, and now it's like, well, how can I help people here who are maybe stuck in addiction, right? And are using that as a mechanism, because I feel like most people have some sort of addiction now too. But that's a whole nother conversation, right? Our cell phones are an addiction too. So it's how can I use that to help people move forward? Because I didn't have a lot of guidance. I didn't have a male role model really. I had two older brothers. However, it wasn't that type of relationship where I was like inspired, right? One of my brothers was in a gang in high school. He's not in it now. He's doing great. He's like a pastor in Arizona. He's like overcame that. He had his own addictions and his whole journey. However, I didn't really talk to him when I was younger. My other brother was also very reserved, very quiet. So I didn't have a male role model. And my dad was gone. And now I'm figuring it out, piecing it together, and decided to finish high school very quiet, reserved. I got along with people. I was friendly. However, I was very reserved in high school. High school was just, for me, it was just go do what I got to do and leave. I didn't really have that experience of enjoying it, right? I was in my head most of the time. And I'd even when my father passed away in high school, I didn't tell anybody, right? So that's another
Comes back
issue.
to the thyroid, right?
Yeah, I didn't tell a single person. Like not a single person knew, because it was over the summer before my senior year. I came back and it was like I was quiet most of the time. I did all my schoolwork. I was a good student and never got in trouble. But I didn't communicate these things. Maybe a couple people knew, but yeah, that's another thing. Why did I feel like the need to not tell anyone? Not sure exactly. However, now I know that's not how you grieve. That's
Well,
not how you
yeah,
process pain.
it
And
wasn't demonstrated for you. And that's where the generational learning impacts everybody, because we are taught what our children or what our parents teach us, right? And they're taught what they know, So that's how that cycle continues. And it is up to me now to break that cycle, because I wasn't taught how to grieve appropriately, not even appropriately, healthy in a healthy
Mhm,
way. You weren't either, right? So break the cycle before I pass that on to my kids.
mhm,
That's how that cycle continues. The grieve alone and be strong and time heals all wounds and all these things that we're taught replace the loss. These are all myths of grief that we teach in grief recovery. And in grief recovery, like you said, with addictions, we call them STIRBs, short-term energy relieving behaviors. And we all have a vice of some sort that we resort to feel better for a short period of time. But
Absolutely.
it's not long lasting, right? So we have to keep that pattern of behavior continues until we can become aware that our patterns of behavior are related to our emotion.
Exactly. And one thing I've learned and I share is an emotion not fully felt, not fully expressed, continues to perpetuate until it's fully felt. It will linger in the background too, oftentimes. You might not be thinking about it. You might have that resentment towards someone for like 10 years ago. Like, I forgot about that. Like, I don't care about that. Screw that person. There's still some energy there,
I'm fine.
you know?
And that's what we say in
Yeah,
grief
I'm
recovery
fine.
too. Feelings inside, not expressed. That's what fine is. I'm fine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How many times have I said that, right?
Right?
Countless.
Same.
And it was that every single day I'd show up like, I'm good, I'm fine, whatever. Let's just do this so I can go home. Right? Just even that, right? And that's even for someone to notice when their energy is low and they feel tired, they feel drained. There's something there, right? The brain is suppressing something and it's taking up energy,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I ask people this one. This is a great question to ponder. Like, what are you trying to forget?
That's a good one.
That is a question that will ask yourself that, reflect on that. Because I ask myself, and now it starts bringing up things because when you fully express something, when you fully grieve, you're not trying to forget anything.
Mm-hmm.
You're not trying to pretend it wasn't there, didn't happen. You fully acknowledge it. You've came to acceptance, and then past acceptance is surrendering it, right? And that's where it begins. But it begins with that conscious, intentional question or questions of that some type of work to get you thinking about it. Why am I holding on to this? Like, do we want to be right, or do we want to be happy and healthy? Because forgiveness, surrendering to something that at this point I have no control over, that's going to liberate me to be happy and healthy and create the greatness that I have within me and share that with the world. But until I face it head on, it's going to operate in the background. I'm going to be tired. I'm going to be down. Everything's going to be fine. I'm going to have pains in my body. I'm going to have disease. I have to go to the doctor or get drugs for. I'm going to be just surviving instead of thriving and being happy and fulfilled. All of that begins with acknowledgement, acceptance, and surrendering to the pain, the trauma. Because honestly, from my experience in this work, and I've been talking to a lot of people about it, everybody has something or multiple somethings, right? So it's when I started talking about some of the addictions and some of the issues I've had, I started seeing that like everyone has some issue, even if it's not the same exact one. There's a lot of people that do deal with the same issues I'm dealing with. And that's another concept for people to grasp. If you have an issue and you're not fine, and you have an issue in a relationship or a work or whatever the case is, there are pretty much everyone around you has some sort of issue too. You're not the only one. And that's the type of thing that made me isolate myself. I felt like I was the only one dealing with this, right? And then if I actually think about it, a lot of people lose loved ones. A lot of people seeing family hate and pain and never seen love in their life, and some people seen worse, right? And it's all relative. However, it is still stopping us from living fully and just and having that life of that we think is impossible sometimes, that's a thing right there, that limiting belief, and starting to understand that it is possible to not live in suffering and pain, to be depressed, to have these mental health issues. It is possible to be happy. That's a critical belief, I believe.
So what were you searching for when you decided to join the military?
I was very in my head logically about it. At the time, I wanted to join the FBI. I figured this is a good way to get out of the small town I was in, because I wasn't in Vegas. I was born in Vegas, but I was living in New Jersey, which I didn't wasn't really fond of. I wanted to get away, so it was more of that too. Like I wanted
Mhm.
to just
Run away?
run
Yep.
away, right? Run away from my life and start a new one. I wanted to get his clearance so I can go in the FBI and get military experience and then just get out, right? And searching for a path that I know I can succeed in, right? Because I didn't really have that many friends throughout high school and those things. So it just felt right. I can go, I build relationships. Military leaders will help me, guide me. Maybe I'll travel, get out my comfort zone. I'll challenge myself. I'll get uh, military experience. Potentially be a high quality candidate for the FBI. That changed. I didn't want to work for the government ever after my second deployment. However, I've learned so much in that time, and I probably the best decision I've made, even though it was a lot of pain and suffering that I created for myself by not dealing with things health in a healthy way, right? And that's another thing I tell people is suffering is optional. Suffering is optional, and we get to choose. As hard as it is, it's still a choice. And that's what I was running away from my life, starting over. My father passed away. I didn't like where I was at. I didn't want to just do what everyone else is doing, was going to like community college in New Jersey. I saw myself just doing different, and that's what made me join.
Well, and I ask that too because I think your story is different, but it's very similar to a lot of people that join the military. It's because and it is a lot of people that come from dysfunctional homes that didn't have that discipline, or they didn't have that stability, or they didn't have structure in their lives. And so or they, like you know, you didn't have maybe the camaraderie and friendships and solid support in that way. So you're looking for that in the military, which every branch you'll find that for sure. Um, but again, like you said, you were a submarine of dysfunctional men, you know, from dysfunctional backgrounds. And it's not to say it's no one asks for that, right? Like you don't ask for that, but you don't know how to handle the cards you're dealt with if you've never been guided or you know, received that demonstration of how to do that. And again, I think too, like you kind of to your point, I think it's a waste of our lives to not ask ourselves the deeper questions that lead to us fulfilling what it is, the maximum of our potential, right? So,
Absolutely, yeah.
what
And
is one, oh, go ahead.
oh, sorry, I was just gonna say when we do start reflecting deeply and asking those questions, we have the answers,
Mhm.
and it just takes a little bit of reflection. I did a lot of that when I was trapped in a tube most of the time.
But you don't need to be trapped in a tube to do that, right?
You don't, right?
Yeah.
The worst trap is the one we just keep here
Yeah, exactly.
without
The prison of
realizing
our
it.
minds. Yes,
That's the
that's,
worst one.
yeah. And how many of us were in prison or are in prison or feel like we're in prison to our circumstances?
Hmm.
Um, so what
Suffering is
is,
optional.
yeah, but action is the anecdote, right?
Hmm.
Doing something about it. And so I guess my question is then to you, what would you say to someone, you know, yeah, it's easier said than done. What would you say to someone? How do you where do you start?
Yeah. So
Okay, I asked
it's
myself this
important.
question. I
Yeah.
asked myself, what are you trying to forget? I've asked myself that question. Well, I know what I'm trying to forget. Now what?
Mhm. A lot of it is just we think it's going to happen overnight or over in a week, in a month, and it's not. So first understanding that it is now that you have the awareness and the idea that it's possible to get over this, looking at it as a lifetime journey, a lifelong process of learning and bettering. Because that's one of the things I saw, that why sometimes people might not succeed in the counseling with a psychologist that are like 1 hour sessions every week or month. Sometimes that's too much at a time. And it's about just getting a little bit better. So instead of thinking of like, oh, I need to overcome all these issues right now, that's going to overwhelm you. So it's, how can I do one thing today to get me to make progress? Or if it's breaking a habit, how can I do one less of that one thing, right? And it's breaking it down, because sometimes it's many things. Sometimes you might have many different issues, many addictions, and you want to take them all on at once, and then you won't, because it's too much. It's overwhelming, and you haven't grown to the person necessary to overcome all those things at that time, because it's a growing process. It's a practice. So what is one thing I can do today to help me maybe release some of the tension? What's one practice I can start right now? One habit I can develop, whether it's talk to a Reiki master, whether that's do 5 minutes of breathing, or whether that's write something out, whether that's exercise, whether that's take your energy, move your energy somewhere else. Right? It's the little things that really make the big changes. And it's developing habits. So starting small to just get better. What can I do today to get better? And then tomorrow, not beat myself up because I haven't overcame everything yet. Know that I just got a little bit better. I did 10 minutes of meditation today. Wow. Like tomorrow, let me do that again. Whether even if it's 5 minutes, whatever, a few breaths, like start becoming aware and taking small steps consistently over time. That's what makes great change. It's not like, okay, I got to stop. Let me talk about my trauma in a 1 hour session and it's all gone. Like, no, sometimes it has to be more controlled, shorter increments over time. And you start releasing some of that energy over time. And it's a process. So don't set expectations for yourself to have it all done right now, because it's a process and it's a never ending learning journey. I'm constantly learning ways to overcome the issues that arise for me. However, it's small steps, small steps. What's the one thing I can do right now that can help me just be better? And then start isolating those things. Once you break down the most destructive habit, let that be the sole focus, right? And then break that down until it's gone. And when that's done, you can move on to the next one. But it's like you want to fix everything all at once, you're not going to know how. So it's break it down small and then move forward from there.
And that's pretty much how it started for me. My growth, post-traumatic growth, I think it was a midlife crisis, which I think is very common for people. You end up in a midlife asking yourself bigger questions and things like that. And so that's how it kind of started for me. Got a life coach, was doing a little bit of this, a little bit of that, started writing, but it wasn't enough for me. Like I realized grief is my issue. I had another loss that kind of opened up a can of worms, which often is what happens too when people realize like you have one loss, that just like, okay, I'm done. I can't take this anymore. I just want to feel better. And so that's what led me to grief recovery. which changed my life, opened me up to Reiki and all these other opportunities and things. This podcast, like it's been like a growth just in the last 2 years after I dealt with my grief. And like to speak to what you said earlier with trauma and stuff, trauma is what happens and grief is what's left. And
Mhm.
so what has your grief taught you?
My grief taught me that it is necessary to have support in my life. You know, it's necessary for me to have people around me and to not do it myself, which was I had backwards before. I
Most
thought
of
I
us
had to
do.
deal with it myself so I can, show up the best version, right? But you won't be able to show up the best version if you're holding on to a lot of pain and suffering and grief and trauma, right? Those things are consuming a lot of your energy in a subconscious way. So that was the biggest thing, and that's something I still work on. I'm having people around me who can see this. They're my mirrors, my mirrors. If I'm not showing up my normal self or happy or whatever, I see it around me now because I surrounded myself with people, right? And everyone's just a mirror. So having the support and knowing that it's okay to feel crappy. It's okay to feel that because that's part of dealing with emotions.
It
And
shows us the
emotion,
contrast.
yeah.
That's the
And
contrast. Yeah.
a lot of times emotion is just data, it's information to me. If I'm angry, angry is not bad or good. It's what I do with that becomes bad or good. Because if I'm angry and I go take it out, go yell in a pillow or go run or whatever, and now I've expressed that energy and I'm no longer feeling that anger, now I can learn from that emotion. Like what caused it? Why did it take such a strong root in me or whatever the cause was? I can learn from that. So I've learned so much about how to deal with my emotions and actually how to put words to it. Because a lot of times before I didn't even know how to like put words to it. So I'll just be silent because I don't know. I'm all here. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know how to explain what I'm feeling and experiencing. And that is a practice. That's a huge practice. However, it's a liberating practice because once you start communicating it, and if you speak it out loud to groups or people, you start letting some of that energy out, right? And it might be a little bit by a little bit. If you do it every week, every other week, and you start doing it and releasing that energy and communicating it, eventually that energy would dissipate to nothing and then becomes nothingness instead of a controlling factor of your life. So that's something I've learned and that I'm still practicing. Anytime something comes up, now it's not, let me hold on to this, let me process it. Yeah, I'll process it, and then I have to communicate it some way, whether that's writing it out or communicating to another human being or group in a group fashion. So those are some of my big keys.
That's awesome. And one thing that came to my mind too is how do you know if you're growing? Like how do you know if you are stepping into a better version of yourself? And what's been on the top of my mind this week has been the word patience. And I think it's how you handle the hurry up and wait. That is the military, right? But how you handle the wait, the waiting, whether you're waiting in a grocery line, whether you're stuck in traffic, how do you handle waiting? And I think if you can look at truly how you handle waiting, how patient you are, I think that really is a really good indicator of how much you have grown as a human being.
I
Because I
love
had
that.
a I had a really challenging situation yesterday, which brings to my mind about patience because I don't think the guy expected me to be as patient as I was, but I was more than an hour and a half patient. And I think it was just like, he was trying to push me to, well, I think well, we can do this another time. No, I'm good. I'm very patient. And that was not me 5 years ago, not even 3 years ago. So patience, yeah, that's been a huge thing on the forefront of my mind this week. actually going to write about it in my newsletter, because I think it is a really great indicator of how much patience we actually have with ourselves too. Because
Absolutely.
if we're completely impatient with other people, how can you really be patient with yourself? And really, patience for yourself is compassion for yourself too. So,
Absolutely, which is a huge, huge part of this. It's kind of
mhm.
the essence of what we're talking about when we're saying you have to, it's a process, it's a slow process, daily practice. That requires patience.
Mhm.
Because when you feel like when you want to get over something in like a day, however, it might take longer than that. What if it takes a month to get process something fully? That's okay. Like whatever it is what it is. But it requires patience. And that's a great test. If you're in traffic, how mad do you get?
Mhm.
And is that worth it? And if you get mad at that, all the other little things that come about in your day to day triggers you, you start noticing, oh, I'm just pissed off like most of the day until I go to sleep. Right. And that's where disease and things like that come about.
Yeah, I think we could have just a whole nother conversation about energy
Mm-hmm.
and just the energy of growth, post-traumatic growth. You hear that phrase a lot, but um, yeah. So I just want to encourage everybody to check out your podcast, The Conqueror Approach. And where can people, is there anything else? First, I want to give you the opportunity. Is there anything else that you didn't get to share that you would like to share?
I feel overall complete. Just want to remind people this is a journey. It doesn't end. Once you process one thing, life is just going to continue to fill those things. So it's what we focus on, our energy will flow there, right? And exchange expectations for appreciation was one of the best things I've learned.
Ooh,
Expectations cause suffering.
planned
It's a,
disappointments. Expectations are
exactly.
planned disappointments. Can you say that
Expe-
again, though? What did you say?
exchange expectation for appreciation.
That's good.
Expectation just causes suffering of what it should be, it should look like, it should feel like, whatever the case is. But if you in the moment can shift that to whatever and then change that to appreciation, you find your body being in a completely different state, your mind being in a different state. And that is the goal that we're achieving here is finding peace through grieving, through communicating, through understanding the body and energy. So other than that, my podcast is on every platform. I'm Moussa Mikhail on every platform. So I'd love to connect with anyone.
And I'll put the way you can connect in the show notes, all those links in the show notes. And I thank you so much for your time today, for your service as well. And remember, when you unleash your heart, you unleash your life. Much love.